Hello and welcome to today's financial planning awareness session for people living with dementia or families who have dementia in the family. I'm Richard Higgs from Harold Stevens, and this is Tony Hall from the Bristol Dementia Action Alliance. As you may know, Harold Stevens is a later life financial and estate planning specialist based right here in West Bromwich on the High Street. We pride ourselves in an old-fashioned, face-to-face, local level of service, and we've really specialised in the later life local community, winning some prestigious, even national awards that we were really happy to receive. And we've been getting deeper and deeper into this local later life community, meeting passionate individuals and organisations. And we thought, who better to join me today than Tony Hall from the Bristol Dementia Action Alliance to help me explain a little bit about financial planning for people living with dementia. Just before we start the question and answer session, Tony, can you just briefly introduce yourself, your journey, and a little bit about the Bristol Dementia Action Alliance? I know you've lived and breathed dementia over many years.
Yeah. Okay, well I wear two hats. First of all, I'm a carer. My wife Barbara had symptoms of frontal temporal dementia from 1999. Sadly, she died last April 2022. So we lived with it for 22 years. 10 years ago this year, we started Bristol Dementia Action Alliance, of which I'm the chair. And it's a bit of a mouthful, Bristol Dementia Action Alliance, but we're the Bristol group, allied to similar groups all over the country. We focus on dementia and we're all about action. Our aim as a charity, and we are a registered charity, we started off as a community action group for 2 years, then we became a registered charity, and our aim is to make Bristol the dementia-friendly city of the UK. So that's all very grand, but what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that people with dementia who live in Bristol, work in Bristol, come to a holiday in Bristol, whatever they do in Bristol, if they've got dementia, they need to be treated with common courtesy and respect, just like anybody else. So it's not rocket science, but it's not happening. So, as I say, we've lived with dementia for 20 odd years. We started a charity, and that's why we're here today. And one of the great things about doing an interview like this is care is really expensive. Whatever sort of care you have, care is expensive. So proper financial planning is key really to surviving. So I'm really glad that we're able to do this together.
Pleased to have you. Who better than Tony then to
ask do business with you.
Yeah. So Tony's going to ask me some typical questions that people living with dementia or families with dementia have. You live and breathe dementia on a day-to-day basis. So you're going to put me on the spot today with some questions. Hopefully you have the answers to.
So how can families plan financially to ensure that they are prepared for a dementia diagnosis?
Thanks, Tony. So I think my first advice really is to plan and prepare well in advance of ever needing care, or, nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. Nobody can predict the future, so the most important thing is to take action and actually plan and prepare for different eventualities. Obviously that's the most difficult thing for people to do, but that's the first thing to do really. A good first step would be to do the will. You have to have mental capacity ordinarily to make a will, and a will then direct where you want your assets to go after you've passed away, so in a very tax efficient way. So the first step, get your will done. Second thing would be lasting power of attorneys. So again, you need mental capacity to make a lasting power of attorney, so really important that you make your lasting power of attorney in advance of ever needing or needing that document. There's two lasting power of attorneys. There's a finance and property one and a health and welfare one. The finance and property deals with bank accounts, properties, investments, pensions, and it just enables you to appoint a loved one or someone that you trust to deal with those affairs in case there might be a time that you can't deal with those in the future. The other document is a health and welfare attorney, which is dealing with more day-to-day issues, medication, living arrangements, arranging care, even making decisions around life-sustaining treatment. And again, it just gives you that opportunity to appoint somebody to make those decisions on your behalf, should you not be in a position to do so yourself in the future. In terms of general financial planning, it's really kind of getting things in order. So pensions, investments, all of these arrangements could be potentially really important for you in the future if you were to be diagnosed with dementia. We'll come on to talk about how to pay for care in the future. And really look at what the potential care costs might be and start looking at cash flow planning and just seeing what your financial situation is and what you may or may not be able to afford in the future. In terms of, a lot of people come to me and say, how do you protect your assets from care costs in the future? And again, it's preparation is the most important thing. And we specialise on inheritance tax planning. So these are really effective arrangements, family trust planning, which can protect and ring-fence your assets for the future generations, for your family, rather than see all that money unfortunately go in care costs. As you'll know yourself, Tony, round-the-clock care is really expensive, and people can live with dementia for many, many years, if you've seen. So there are things you can do to protect your assets, but I would definitely advise to look early, plan ahead for the future. There are a couple of specific policies that I would want to mention. You can't actually take out individual care insurance contracts anymore. This was before my time in the early 90s. A lot were sold actually for protecting against care costs, just pure insurance contracts for care.
Right.
The only thing I would say is make sure that you check that person didn't take out one of those policies out back in the 90s, because that person might have dementia and not remember that they took out one of these policies. So always check to see if they've got one of those policies. And the only other specific policy that you can get is a whole of life insurance policy, which is effectively a life insurance policy that can be converted to care costs in the future if you were unable to do what's called ADLs, activity of daily living. So often they'll pay out 75% of the life assured amount if you required care at that time. So I think there's 2 providers of those at the moment. So there are a couple of insurance options, but again, to summarise all that, I think really to prepare and plan ahead is the most important takeaway from that.
Yeah. Well, we had a will. Most importantly, we had a lasting power of attorney, which I had to use because people were trying to make decisions that we didn't want made.
Yeah.
So I had to use our power of attorney to get what we wanted. So thanks for mentioning those 2 and all the others. I didn't know about the others, but there you go. We're all here. It's a learning exercise.
Just to reiterate, to get these, I call them rainy day documents, just to get them done, put them in the drawer, and hopefully you'll never need them, because the result, the outcome of not having these in place is just so painful, costly, timely. You have to apply to the Court of Protection. It's just a really painful and intrusive process for the family. So definitely get these things in place in advance.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so what are some of the options available for funding long-term care for people living with dementia?
Okay, so really the first thing to mention is there's a difference between social care and health care. So usually, broadly speaking, we're talking about social care with people living with dementia. It's help around the house, it's kind of living safely, in the home. And here we're talking about local authority. So it's means tested. So if you have assets over currently 23,250. There was talk about changing that, but that's kind of been kicked into the long grass now. So if you have assets over 23,250, effectively you're a self-funder, and then you'll be asked to pay for care. There are some what we call asset disregards that the local authority won't include in your assets, and the biggest one usually is property. So if you're living with dementia but with your spouse, the property would be disregarded, or if the spouse has moved into a home, a dementia home, but the other spouse is living in the main family home, that house would then be disregarded.
Right.
There are others that we can go into. And also the local authority will take all your income, so any pension income, they kindly give you a personal expense allowance. I think it's £29 a week or something. Very generous of them.
Well, don't spend it all at once.
That's it, yeah. So that's social care costs. Then we move on to healthcare. So obviously in this country all healthcare is free at the point of need, paid for by the NHS. So really we're talking about NHS continuing healthcare, which is a fully funded care by the NHS. So really difficult to get. There's a common misconception that people with dementia can't qualify for NHS continuing healthcare. That's actually not the case. It's not down to the illness. It's down to the specific criteria that they use during the assessment.
Okay.
But the way the decision tool works is that it makes it extremely unlikely that if you're living with dementia that you will get NHS continuing healthcare, but it is worth checking out.
Yeah.
There's specialist law firms that can kind of look into this, sometimes on a no-win, no-fee basis. And it is actually estimated that over 100,000 people are living with dementia in the UK who could qualify for this, so
Wow.
definitely worth checking out.
Yeah.
There's also
basically 10% of people with dementia.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
So don't take that you can appeal the decision. Funnily enough, they give you the option to appeal even while you're applying. So it's almost like they're expecting the outcome to be negative and then you to appeal for it. So always worth checking that out. And then you've got funded nursing care, which is similar, which is a paid for NHS nursing care, only payable if you are in a nursing home environment. The NHS continuing healthcare is in any setting, so it could be paid even in your own home. So, so that's NHS. So you kind of go through the different ways of funding, and then you're kind of into self-funded care, which a lot of our clients at Harrow Stevens will automatically fall into. So we look at income. So any pension income, any investment income, clearly can contribute towards paying for care costs. Remember to claim any benefits that you might be entitled to, especially attendance allowance is the big one. That's the one that's not means tested, so anybody can claim it's worth having, and it's not taxable, so to make sure look out for that one. And then you're into self-funded capital, which is the one everybody fears, that you're kind of using the family's assets to pay for care, and often the decision will be around the property, whether to keep the property or to sell the property. And so we have a lot of conversations with clients around planning around the property, really. So in terms of keeping the property, a lot of families want to keep the property in the family. They want to. It's the family home. They don't want to have to sell the property to pay for care. So the options are a deferred payment agreement with the local authority. This is an arrangement where you don't have any other assets, you just have the property. So if you were to apply for a DPA and still have 100,000 in the bank, they'd probably tell you to come back once you've spent all that money. And basically a DPA, a deferred payment agreement, is the local authority would pay for your care, but the charges would go up against the value of the house. The advantage is it means that you can still retain the house and not have to sell it at that time. The interest rate tends to be quite low with the DPA, and it means that the government can kind of adhere to their promise that you don't have to sell your property in your lifetime, although obviously you may have to sell it after you've passed away to pay for the DPA, but
You pay the council on death, really.
yeah, basically, yeah. So that's an option. You could rent out the property, which is often a desirable thing anyway, because it means the property is being maintained, costs are being, council tax, all these kind of bills are being paid, and it does mean that it's making the property generate an income for you, making it work harder. And then finally, equity release is another option. So that's basically a lifetime mortgage on the house. So you could raise money on the house, very flexible. You could draw down a facility, draw down an income, draw down capital, and it just enables you to pay for any potential care for that person living with dementia, but using the equity in the house and not have to sell the house. The other option, of course, is to sell the home, and that's usually the simplest option, because then that gives the family a lump sum to enable them to pay for the care that person requires. And the options become relatively straightforward. You can either put the money in the bank and just kind of draw it off as and when you go. The disadvantage being that you're probably not working that hard for you, and it will just be eroded over time. You could invest some of the money for longer term, if that's available to you. And there's also a product called an immediate care plan product, where you can put a lump sum into a provider and they'll pay a guaranteed income for life directly to the care home provider. And that's often an attractive option for families that really want to guarantee that person in that home, that they're not going to have to move out, or money's not going to run out. It's just a guaranteed payment for life. And often it's a combination of these things. Maybe have a guaranteed plan, have some money invested over the longer term, and have some money in the bank for short-term needs. So we'll take clients through all the pros and cons of all these options, but as I say, it's usually a combination really. But the main thing is just talking to the customer, the client, the family, getting to grips with the family dynamics and just ascertaining what the best route is really.
Yeah. I didn't realise there were so many options, because half of those I've never heard of. But anyway, next one is there anything that can be done to protect someone's assets after a dementia diagnosis and facing expensive care costs as the dementia progresses?
Yeah, this is so common. We get a lot of inquiries from families because, as you'll know, it's extremely expensive to pay for care, especially with dementia. It could be round-the-clock care, and it could mean that the assets of the family can be eroded really quickly. And so often people will come to me. If I take a back step again, it's all about pre-planning. So often people will come to me after the diagnosis, so people are already in care, and the natural question is, how do we protect the assets, because we can see them dropping dropping off a cliff. Really difficult at this stage. So because we are running the gauntlet of what's called deliberate deprivation. Deliberate deprivation is what the local authority call it when you are depriving yourself of assets in order to save paying for care costs yourself. It's a grey area. You can go onto the local ombudsman government website to see what the current cases are outstanding in northwest Bristol, to see how strict they are. But it does become quite difficult to plan. But it's not to say that you can't do anything. So really we're looking at three things. We're looking at timing, motive and intention, and the actual amount that you're planning with. So in terms of timing, really we want to be doing any planning or any gifting or any spending in advance of a dementia diagnosis. Obviously timing is working against you if you're looking to plan after you're already in care. But the local authorities still have to look at the motive and intention of any planning that you're doing. So For example, if there's a legitimate inheritance tax requirement and we're doing some professional independent inheritance tax planning for families, that would be considered a legitimate financial plan. If you're looking to do a trust fund for a grandchild or a vulnerable child, that would be considered a legitimate plan. If a family member wants to contribute or gift money to another family member who is in trouble or who has an illness themselves, that would be considered a legitimate intentional gift. So the local authority have to look into things. They can't assume that you're gifting money away because you want to avoid care costs. And the other one I wanted to mention was amount. So if you're giving away £300,000 to your son and £300,000 is all you have, that clearly is going to be looked at or flagged by the local authority. If you gift away £500 and you have £3 million in assets, clearly that's a very small amount compared to the overall capital value. So they do have to look at the amount and how significant it is compared to your overall assets as well.
Yeah. Well, the good news is I haven't got £3 million, but you've stated quite a few options there. So in fact, you've given me food for thought. So it's been useful doing this.
There's no black and white answer. It's very grey. So just my advice would be to come to us and we can just discuss the options really.
Well, I might be doing that in a professional capacity. Anyway, what about a family home? If one spouse is living with dementia and is in a care home, but the other is living at home, how can the family home be protected from dementia care costs?
Yeah, thanks. So again, we're talking the biggest asset is usually the family home, and that's by far and away the most common question. So the typical example would be, the spouse is diagnosed with dementia, the disease has progressed, and they've moved into a care home, but the other spouse is still living in the family home. Under that scenario, the family home is protected, it's disregarded. They can't use that asset to pay for the care of the person that's living in the home. So that's probably the first thing to point out. The risk with that situation is that the person living in the home, living in the family home, passes away before the person living with dementia in the care home. Because most property is owned by joint tenants basis. So under that situation, the half the property owned by the person that passed away in the family home would pass to the person living in the care home, which would basically mean that suddenly the person living in the care home, it becomes a self-funder because they own all the house, and that puts the house then at risk because the assets of that house then have to be used to pay for the care. There is planning available around that. Without going into too much detail today, we could change the ownership of the house into tenancy in common, which basically means that the person living in the house owns 50% of the property. If they were to die first, that 50% could be directed, instead of the person living in the care home, could be directed to a trust or other beneficiary, and that effectively then protects and ring-fence that half of the house. So there is planning you can still do even if a family member has moved into a care home and is paying for dementia care costs.
Well, thanks for that. Again, food for thought there for me. So thanks for that. Right, for someone who has been appointed LPA for a person living with dementia, what are some of the key legal considerations when dealing with their financial affairs? Yeah,
sure. So we often will be dealing with the attorney as opposed to the person living with dementia. We include them in the discussions, we talk to them as a family, but often it will be the lasting power attorney that we're actually giving advice to, and quite often that person will be the beneficiary as well of the estate. So in the vast majority of cases, the attorney is working in by far and away in the best interests of the person living with dementia, hopefully, but that is the case most of the time. But there is a conflict of interest because they could benefit from the estate. But my duty of care is always, as the advisor, is always to the client, the person with dementia. So one of the biggest things I want to get across is that when we are doing all this pre-planning that I talked about, getting things done early, you will always be my client. I will always protect you in the future should that lasting power of attorney be required. And I'll be advising professionally the attorney to work in your best interest. So that's
good news.
So I really feel quite strongly about that. It's not just a case of getting the document done and waving goodbye to the family. We take it very seriously, our professional obligation to really help the attorney.
It's basically a moral issue.
With the family, yeah. But in terms of the attorney, it's often seen as almost an honour, I guess, to be chosen as the lasting power of attorney until it actually happens, and then a lot of legal and financial responsibilities suddenly fall on the shoulders of that person. So they have a legal responsibility to act in the best interests of the donor. They have to take reasonable care into the decision making around that person. They need to act in accordance with the lasting power of attorney. So each LPA may have instructions or directions that the attorney wanted to make clear when they were writing that document. So that all has to be worked towards. And they have to make decisions on behalf. They have to help the donor make decisions. Is the starting point, really. So it's not a case of kind of going away and assuming that person has lost capacity. I mean, capacity can go up, and as you all know, capacity can go up and down, and depending on the day. So it's a day-to-day process of helping that person make decisions rather than a black and white situation. So it is quite a responsibility being an attorney, but we're here to help. So take advice from us, take advice from your solicitor, another financial advisor. But I think probably take advice initially would be, but because people aren't trained in financial and legal matters, and it is quite a difficult thing quite a responsible thing to take on.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Assuming that wills, LPAs are in place for someone or their carer diagnosed with dementia, from a financial point of view, where do you start?
I know I do feel for people, because as much as I bang on about preparing and planning, it's really hard you get thrown into this situation, this stressful situation with the family, and there's a hell of a lot of information out there. There's just almost too much information. So again, take advice. We often see ourselves as the central point where we can signpost people to different resources. But I like to try and keep it as simple as possible. So the first thing is the single assessment process, where you go through the financial and the needs assessment. That's probably the first port of call. Look for NHS continuing healthcare. Look at the possibility of that. As part of that, look to see whether you can get funded nursing care if that person's in a nursing home. So then go on to local authority. Do we qualify for local authority funding? Is there any of our assets, can they be disregarded from that assessment? Then you move on to self-funded. So what income do we have to pay for care? Have we claimed all the benefits that we are entitled to? Have we organised our financial arrangements to create an income for that care cost? And then move on to capital. So once you've ascertained what the deficit is, then we move on to capital. What capital do we have? And then you kind of go on to the choices that we talked about before. What do we do with the property? How do we fund care? So it's kind of almost like a flow chart of things to go through, which we could go through with clients. But just take plenty of advice and support, and get someone you trust, probably first thing, that can hold your hand through that process. And good luck really, and hopefully it all works out once you've been through the process.
Yeah. Well, if you're playing early, good luck, don't come into it, do you?
Yeah.
Anyway, next one is, if someone has dementia and no longer has the mental capacity to make a will or lasting power of attorney, is there anything else that can be done?
Yeah, it's difficult. Again, common theme, plan, take action in advance. Generally speaking, you do need to have mental capacity to make a will or lasting power of attorney. The only real option is a statutory will. It is a possible route where you can apply to the Court of Protection, or a loved one can apply to the Court of Protection. Very time-consuming, expensive process, but there is that mechanism. And in terms of lasting power of attorney, you can apply to the Court of Protection, or a loved one can apply to the Court of Protection for a deputyship, which is basically the equivalent of a lasting power of attorney, but it's appointed by the court. So these mechanisms do exist, but to manage people's expectations, it can be really expensive, very time consuming, and very intrusive to the family. So again, get these things done in advance, but all is not lost if you don't have them in advance. There's still mechanisms that you can go through.
From a BDAA point of view, we always encourage carers to get their loved one or get an LPA in place, because a friend of mine who was a carer almost lost her house because she didn't get an LPA in time. Fortunately, she just made it. But as a result of that, we always encourage people to get a will and an LPA in place as soon as possible, while the person with dementia has capacity.
That's great. That's perfect advice.
In actual fact, we give a fridge magnet to the carer with 4 things to do as soon as you get a diagnosis.
That's fantastic.
I'll bring you one.
Put a 5th Harold Stevens on there.
Yeah, it's got BDAA on it. Okay, so when someone is living with dementia, what estate planning can still be done?
So again, it's really quite difficult. Planning in advance would be my first answer to that. But it's not impossible, so we just have to take extra care when, as a will writer, when writing a will or when making a lasting power of attorney. There's the obvious risks of the validity. Any claims could be made if that person, if there's signs that perhaps they don't have mental capacity. So really get these things in place at a time when that person can still make those things. Really important that extra care is taken during that process to establish mental capacity, and that would be done face to face here in the office. This is why we've built this local office. We would talk to that person, have a two-way conversation, listen to what they're saying, ensuring that they're understanding, getting them to perhaps summarise to ensure that retaining and understanding the information that we're given. If we're still in doubt, we would have to take medical advice, and really if we can't get those assurances, it might be that we just can't proceed on that basis if we're not sure about the mental capacity. We would always make extensive notes on the file with regard to any case. So if we can go back to them, or the family can go back to them in the future, it could make the case stronger that the will is valid based on those notes and that medical evidence. But again, it's getting these things in place early as possible.
Just a question on capacity. Do you have to have a doctor to say this person has capacity or not? Is that part of the rules these days? Initially
it's our judgment, so we specialise in later life, so all of our conversations are in the office, and there's no better way of ascertaining capacity than really getting to know people, especially over years and years of knowing people, and that's why we have the wellbeing checklist, and this is why we engage with people like experts like yourself, so we can really kind of up our game.
I'm not an expert, Richard, I'm still learning.
We're all learning, but so it's kind of it's a process really, But if we're not sure, then of course we're not doctors, and we would need to get medical assistance in terms of a doctor's report or from that basis. So there's no hard and fast rules, but the absolute golden rule is to get medical advice. If we're not sure, it would be to get medical advice. And that would be my advice anyway, to make sure everything is valid as possible.
Okay, thank you. As a later life financial and legal specialist, what expertise do you bring to your advice process when dealing with families affected by dementia?
Excuse me. So we've built the entire business to be friendly towards later life, vulnerable clients, families with dementia, people living with dementia. So we've taken it upon ourselves to take extra training and awareness for not only myself but for the whole team. So I mentioned the wellbeing checklist. That's a checklist which is used by the entire team at every point of contact from the general public, and it enables us to gauge where people are at in terms of how vulnerable they are, and that's right from the first phone call to the reception to myself. And and that enables us to adapt and change our services to adapt to that person's situation. So every person is an individual, so we work with them individually, and we adapt our processes and services accordingly.
Do you have to do extra training to be a member of SOLA?
SOLA is the gold standard of dealing with later life. So yes.
So they require extra training? Yeah,
you do a very modern assessment. So we have a day-long assessment of going through practical case studies where we're examined on how we speak to clients and whether we speak in a language that's gentle and they can understand. Sure. And that's an ongoing process as well. So yes, SOLA is the gold standard of that, and even within that, we won national awards as part of that process. So we're really proud of what we've done for a small local shop in Westbury. We're overjoyed and thrilled really to have those accolades.
You're like us. BDAA is a small team with big ambitions.
That's it. Yeah. But really, they're just coming back to what we do. So in terms of the meeting preparation, from the first call, we would ascertain where, if that person is living with dementia, what are their symptoms, what can they do, what can't they do, what to expect when they come to the office. Is there anything that we need to know about? So we would try and adapt our services accordingly. The meeting environment as you see in the office, it's kind of a living room style format to make people as comfortable as possible, but also it's professional. So we've made it a business environment as well. So clients know that it's a business meeting, and that person living with dementia know that it's an actual meeting.
Well, it's relaxed but business-like, isn't it?
Yeah. And then I'm still learning, but I feel that compared to the average financial advisor, I'm highly skilled when dealing with clients that are living with dementia. I have extra training in terms of speaking to the family. I will try and engage that person that's living with dementia by speaking to them as a person, as they are, an individual in their own right. I will talk to them both, not individually, and I will listen and treat the situation very sensitively at all times.
One of the major problems is that people talk to the carer rather than the person with dementia.
Yeah.
People used to say to me, can Barbara do this? And I used to say, well, ask her. She's got a tongue in her head. She can, until she got to the stage where the dementia had progressed, where she couldn't respond.
Yeah, that's so true. And that's where the dementia awareness that you, Tony, provided us came in so handy, because that's exactly what happened. I would tend to be naturally having the conversation with the carer, but that I've now got so much more confidence now to deal with both of those clients and introduce conversational icebreakers to speak to that person that's living with dementia and just treat that person like the person they are, like the human being they are, and
Well, that's what they are, they just deal.
Exactly, yeah. So I feel very confident and comfortable with that, as everybody should be. And that's what we want.
Absolutely. Right, last one. What are some of the strategies that family can use to manage their loved one's financial affairs if they are unable to do so themselves?
Yeah, I think this is quite. We're talking about difficult things here, about difficult concepts and difficult, stressful times for the family and complicated financial and legal matters. So I would always recommend taking advice. I'm going to say Harold Stevens, but we have set up the business for this situation in the local community. I can't see any way other than having a local family office where you can assess that person face to face, you can assess the family dynamics.
Yeah.
I can get to know the different personalities involved and navigate through that. I can't see how it can be done in any other way. We are completely independent, which is really important to know, because it means that I'm just working on behalf of you and I'm just trying my best for you as a family.
Sure.
I believe we're the only, I can't think of any other firms really in the UK that are only specialising in this area and have the financial planning and the legal part of it all in one place.
Right.
So that you know that when you come into the office, you are getting that full level of service and getting that joined up advice. And ultimately, it's about us caring about you.
You've raised an important point there. Joined up, because a lot of stuff isn't joined up. You need to go to one specialist and they'll tell you what they know, but what about the other bits that they don't know?
Exactly.
So
yeah.
when it's joined up, that benefits everybody, really.
Exactly. And that's why we did it, and that's why we do what we do. We're so passionate about what we do. We are collaborating with people like yourself, Tony, and other organisations and individuals to make this the very best later life community.
It's a pleasure doing business with you,
yeah,
Richard, if I might say.
We love dealing with you too. And thanks today for the questions. It was really good and put me on the spot there.
Well, I've learned a lot, and I might be coming to you for some advice.
That's it, yeah. You're always welcome for a cup of tea and I know you love your donuts. Yeah, you love your donuts. So really, for anybody watching this today, please get in touch. You know where we are. We're on the High Street in West Bromtrim. Be lovely to see you. Happy to see and say hello. And thanks so much for joining us today. And Tony, I know you've got lots going on yourself at the Bristol Dementia Action Alliance. What have you got going on in the next few weeks?
Well, it's our 10th birthday this year, so we've got some big ideas to celebrate that. We're having a silent disco at our memory cafe. Our memory cafe is called Happy Days, because we believe people with dementia can still have happy days. So when we meet, we're silly for 2 hours, because what's the best medicine? Laughter.
Yeah.
So yeah, we got lots of plans. We'll be giving our awards out later on in September, because we launched our awards scheme last September.
We'll be looking for the gold award.
So we've given you one of our BDAA awards, and we want to. Was it gold we gave you?
I think we got silver last year.
Right. Well,
I think it's gold this year.
Well, we've got bronze, silver, and gold, but we're thinking, because of the gold people, we want them to do more. So we're thinking of having platinum now.
Okay.
So anyway, we got lots of stuff planned. But if you want to know more, just put BDAA into your internet browser and it'll come up. Or you can email office@bdaa.org.uk.
Great job. Thanks, Tony. So thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Cheerio.
Bye.